Sony's flagship WF-1000 XM5 versus
Jabra's flagship Elite 10.
There can be only one winner.
Goedendag, we're DHRME. Dutch homies review many electronics.
Alright guys, kicking things off in the looks department, the Sony comes in just two colors. You got this black and you get it in silver or beige. And then you've got Jabra, which comes in this cream color, or it comes in four other colors: matte black, cocoa, titanium black, and gloss black. So plenty of options to choose from when it comes to Jabra. And then in terms of size, both are definitely pocketable. They're not very thick. They are pretty small. But if you really need to compare both of them side by side, we have to say that the Sony is smaller. And even though both cases are quite compact, luckily both of them support Type-C charging as well as wireless Qi charging. So there's no compromise there. Now, speaking of charging, let's talk about battery life. On the Sony, the advertised number is 8 hours, and we've tested that in our DHRME battery test, and we got 7 hours, so 1 hour less. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Jabra advertises only 6 hours. Now you might say, oh, that's less than Sony. Probably should go for Sony if I want battery life. Wrong. When we tested it, we got 12.5 to 13 hours of battery life. It's crazy. Why would you underpromise that much and over-deliver? Anyway, the total battery life with the charging case on both is rated at 24 hours. Now, staying on the case, right? So when we got the Jabra, because that's the recent release, I took these buds out of the case and I put them on the table and they fell over because these guys do a little handstand. So this is the front of the case, upright, but you can't put it down. You have to turn it around and put it down like this. Whereas on the Sony, what you see is what you get. You just place it down like this.
With some objective facts here, Jabra is already pulling ahead. The Sony has an IPX4 rating on the buds themselves and nothing on the case, whereas Jabra has IP57 rated buds, which means you're pretty good to go for any kind of dusty situations, but also for liquids. These are way more resistant than the Sony. Now, opening up the case, the Jabra buds have a slight rubberized feel to them. They're very easy to take out of the case, and Sony actually looks and feels like a bit cheap with the smooth plastic look as opposed to the XM4, which felt a bit more premium. And when you come to the tips on the buds, they're also very different and they have a different design philosophy. Let us explain. The one on the Sony are round and they're made of this kind of foam material, whereas on Jabra you get silicone, good old silicone. I love me some silicone. Oval shaped tips, and we'll talk a bit more about them in the comfort and fit section. All we can say now is that the foam on the Sony just loves earwax. It gets dirtier than our minds in some of our videos, and that's saying a lot. The Sony comes with touch controls, and these touch controls are decent, but Jabra comes with buttons, and buttons for the win, guys. You can use it with gloves, and there are very few accidental touches, and they've got the travel just right, so you don't have to press it too hard. Sony's touch is also reliable, mind you, so not knocking Sony on that, but we are just buttonophiles. Also, the control scheme feels more intuitive on the Jabra. Now, both have track control, voice assistant, and volume, but volume control on the Sony is 4 taps. So you have to tap 4 times on the right bud for volume up and, on the left bud for volume down. Whereas on Jabra, it's just pressing and holding down one of the buttons, which is so much more intuitive.
Alright guys, let's talk about the comfort and fit. Jabra takes the cake. Hands down. The oval silicone tips that the Jabra come with, as well as the semi-open insertion, is just, these are a lovely all-day use kind of buds. I really don't mind keeping them in my ear all day long. Now, what does Sony do? They go with very much in-ear style, and they have those foam tips that expands into the walls of your ear canal. And let's just say you really feel its presence. It's very much there, all up in your holes, ear holes. And it's not the most pleasant. It's not a feeling that goes away. It just kind of stays, and it's there, and it kind of borderline uncomfortable, painful. That's where it is. So between the two, it's no competition. It's the Jabra all the way. Despite the fact that you feel the Sony all day long, it does create a better seal. Now that's going to make a little bit of a difference in the sound quality, but we'll get to that a little later. And even though the Jabra has that oval fit, you might think, oh yeah, shallow insertion, it's going to fall out. But actually between the two, we felt that they were both okay when you're just sitting down working at your desk, or just walking, or you're bicycling even. But we wouldn't dare do any more vigorous movements. We just wouldn't dare to, because we've had both of them just pop out of our ears. They're just not that secure for intense workouts, and since they have no wingtips or ear hooks, it's just a risk we wouldn't want to take, especially at this price point.
Now, if you're a fuckman, who would you prefer? It's very, very clear. Jabra has always been the fuckman champion. First off, the mute on phone calls with Jabra, it integrates with Microsoft Teams. So if you're working with Windows and using Teams, this is a great feature. And on the Sony, you don't even get mute. Forget about Teams or any other kind of extra mute features. But what's the real downer on the Sony is that you can't really control volume when you're on a call. Volume is only for music. Now, both of these earbuds do side tone or, capture your own voice during a call, which is good. But Jabra also has a bunch of other features for phone calls, like taking the buds out of the case and putting them in your ear answers a call. Taking the buds out of your ear, automatically mutes a call, so you can gossip about the person you're talking to somebody else. There's a bunch of things like that really set the Jabra apart. There's even an EQ preset for the voice you're hearing, so you can turn it up to bass, treble, or just neutral. It's just a ridiculous amount of customization. We're not sure you'll need all of them, but if you need them, you're covered.
That's all great, but you want to hear them, don't you? The popsicles, icicles, and testing.
Popsicle. Icicle. Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Now, let's break it down. The Sony just blocks out more background noise, but the voice sounds quite processed. Now, with the Jabra, you hear more of the traffic, but the voice sounds more natural and clear. So here we clearly like the Jabra. Now, moving to windy conditions, on the Sony, you hear a bit of the wind, but the voice is reasonably clear and loud. On the Jabra, the wind can sometimes be overpowering and the volume of the voice is lower. And when you speak softly, it can be difficult to hear. So in windy situations, we pick the Sony.
Now, in terms of extra features, the headlining feature, at least on the Jabra, is the Dolby support. And, Sony has had 360 reality audio support forever. We'll come to that in the sound section. I have quite a bit of whining I want to do about that. But let's move on. Both support multi-point and pull connection, so you can connect to two devices at once, pause on one device and you can just play audio on the other. That works fine. Both can also pull connection from a previously paired device, so you do have the ability to pair with multiple devices, use two at a time, and from the third you can just go to the Bluetooth menu and pull the connection, so the oldest device disconnects and the newest one connects. You also get Google Fast Pair, you get Microsoft Swift Pair on Jabra. So there's a bunch of features here which connectivity wise I think you're going to be very satisfied. The one advantage Sony does have is that you have a device list in the app and you can kind of choose which device you want to connect to or disconnect from in the app itself, which is very, very useful, very visual. Jabra does not have such a list. And entering pairing mode on Jabra is a bit easier because you don't have to look for a case, put the buds back in and press a button like on the Sony. You can just hold down both buds and it quickly goes into pairing mode. You can connect to a new device. So that's fine. There's also a bunch of other integrations which are, to be honest, just commercial integrations. Feels like Spotify Tap, Sony has integration with Endel and for focus, relax, sleep, whatever.
Okay, both of these buds support deep integration with Google Assistant, so that's there if you want it. One addition though is that Sony has Amazon Alexa as well. Yeah, if you use that, comment it down below. We're very curious. Anyway, moving on. So Sony has another feature which they call quick attention. That's the holding down on the left bud and then it basically drops the volume of the audio you're listening to and opens up transparency mode so you can have a conversation with someone. Pretty useful. But Sony also has a lot of features which we don't use. There's adaptive sound control, so it adapts your noise cancelling based on whether you're sitting in public transport, walking, etc. There's a 20-point slider for transparency mode. We just keep that thing on max because that's the whole point of transparency. You want to hear as much as possible. Then there's speak to chat, which is similar to quick attention, but it gets triggered when you try to speak or sing along with a song. So that's not something we like to enable because we do our fair share of shower singing. And then there's head gestures, which was a new addition to the XM5s, which means that you can hang up and answer calls using your head. This answers a call and this rejects a call and hangs up a call. Very annoying if you're walking or driving and you use this feature, so we just turn that off. But at the end of the day, both of the apps on the Jabra and Sony, it just feels like they're competing for the worst app, or they just fired all their user experience designers, because very confusing. It's just been building on top of each other with extra features and not usable. Please, Jabra, Sony, simplify your apps, because there's only a few settings that you really need, and all that other stuff can go into a side menu. Please do something about it.
Now, noise cancelling, guys. We did not expect this from Jabra, because Sony has always been the noise cancelling champ, and Jabra has always had very good all-round buds, but the noise cancelling has always been wanting. Not anymore. It's tier S on both the Sony and the Jabra actually is slightly better. So while you will not be left wanting on any of these, kudos to Jabra. They really have pulled ahead with noise cancelling tech. You can control this from the earbuds as well. Single tap or press on the left bud toggles the ANC mode. Now on the transparency, the news isn't as great. Both are kind of tier B in our rating scale, but the Sony is slightly better. There's noticeable white noise in transparency mode though on the Sony, whereas on Jabra you don't quite have it, but both are kind of not excellent in this regard, but kind of usable. On the Sony you do get the ability to just focus on voices or have everything audible. With the Jabra it tends to just scoop in the mids, so you don't hear the other frequencies as much, so it's trying to focus on voices by default.
So if you use the Jabras in windy conditions, we've used them while cycling and it generates a lot of wind. In transparency mode, you will hear the wind pipe through the buds a little bit and you'll hear your audio. What'll happen then is Jabra will just kick into noise cancelling without actually putting the buds into noise cancelling, if that makes sense. So the setting still says transparency, but if you move from transparency into noise cancelling and back, there's no difference, and it's pretty much noise cancelling. It's very annoying and also very dangerous, because although the wind is reduced, it definitely gets rid of the wind, but it's dangerous because I'm no longer aware of my surroundings. So this is Jabra basically admitting here that they can't handle wind in transparency mode, which is a shame. There's no reliable way to switch back to transparency here either. The only fix here is either don't use the buds while on a bike when there's wind, or use it with one bud in only, which is kind of not the point. Please introduce a wind noise cancelling feature or setting. Oh, and even though the Jabra has a semi-open insertion and oval tips and all of that, there is a little bit of occlusion. Now, not as much as the active variant, the 8 active, but there is a slight bit of occlusion. Now on the Sony, you don't have that at all. So in this case, we really prefer the Sony when we have the buds in and we have to talk either on a call or to someone else. Just, it feels a lot more natural than with the Jabra. Something to keep in mind for you guys if you're very sensitive for occlusion. All right, let's talk about sound quality and get a couple of specs out of the way. On the Jabra, you get support for 2 codecs only, SBC and AAC. They've done away with aptX, no longer supported. You do get LE audio, and it's coming as part of an update before Christmas. The Sony, you do get LDAC. They both come with spatial audio. Jabra has the Dolby Atmos spatial audio variant, whereas Sony has their own 360 audio. Both come with a 5-band EQ, but the Sony has a bass slider. And when we're talking about driver size, the Jabra has 10mm drivers, whereas the Sony has 8.4mm.
Okay, that was the theory, but how do these buds perform? I've spent a lot of time going back and forth with these two buds. Well, to start with, the Jabra is a smidge louder than the Sony. Both are plenty loud, but if you really want that last bit of difference, the Jabra Elite 10 outdoes the Sony WF-1000 XM5, at least on Android. Now, stock tuning. Sony has a strong mid-bass emphasis and totally works for some types of music. Jabra's stock tuning idea is very similar, but they don't have that mid-bass emphasis. They also have this kind of V or U shape, and they've actually employed bigger drivers to compensate for the open design of the earbuds. The open design, doesn't quite seal, so you need bigger drivers to pump in more bass. So even though you're losing some, you're able to hear enough. For EDM and electronic music, I think I'd give the edge to Jabra, whereas for rock, vocals and pop, I'd probably give the edge to the Sony. So most people will use these buds with the stock sound. So that was about the stock sound signature. But we have a slight nagging feeling that that's not you guys. I mean, you're watching a video where we are nerding out about earbuds. So for you, let's talk about how you can get the most out of these earbuds, starting with EQ. Overall, we'll just say Sony's drivers seem a little bit more flexible and capable for mids and highs, and the buds are more responsive to the EQ in the app. Not to say Jabra is bad, because Jabra also has a 5-band EQ. Irrespective, we felt that the Sony was a bit more responsive and therefore more versatile. But those bigger drivers in the Jabra give it ever so slightly the edge on bass, especially the sub bass. Now let's talk about the headlining feature on the Jabra, the immersive or spatial audio. This is a sorry tale of two standards. Both use the object-based immersive idea, but Sony has a different standard called 360 reality audio, whereas Jabra has worked with Dolby, the same organization standards that Apple touts as spatial audio, and it works fine. Head tracking is also quite smooth on the Jabra. Jabra's also worked with Dolby for a great spatial sound experience. I enabled it in Apple Music and somehow the effect was way better on iOS than on Android. Sony also has 360 reality audio support, its own standard. And you know what, man? I'm going to go and say it. This feature doesn't matter to me at all. The settings are confusing. Should you enable it in the app or the operating system? And what's your source? Does the source support it? Is it mixed using that technology, or is it faked using some upmixing tech? Man, I just want to listen to music or, watch a movie. Get a shit together, spatial audio industry standards. But my guess is if you have an iPhone, it makes more sense to get the Jabra, since they're working with the same platform as Apple's spatial audio. And we couldn't even find a way to enable the Sony WF-1000 XM5 as a spatial audio device on the app on Android. And we tried 2 phones too, because the Bluetooth settings refuse to show that toggle. So this round probably goes to the Jabra, but I don't really care so much about this. Okay, you know what? Again, as I said in the beginning, purely for sound, I've been going back and forth, A/B testing this track and that track and this source with EQ, without EQ. And while the Sony does have the edge for EQ tweaking and the Jabra on some others, my conclusion is this: you'd be just as happy with either of these. There's absolutely nothing in it. Both sound very, very good.
All right, the money question. What do these retail at? So the Jabra is retailing at $250 or euros, and Sony at the $300 euro mark. $50 difference. So what would be my pick? Well, save yourself $50 because I'm picking the Jabra, hands down. So not only those $50 is what drove my decision, but you're getting better comfort because of those oval tips and semi-insertion style. You get buttons, and yeah, just a buttonophile. They're just way more convenient and no accidental touches. Also, the control scheme on the Jabra is way more intuitive. For example, that volume. Then you've got calls. I just use these buds for phone calls, either on my laptop with Teams or on the phone. So I'm always on a call. So the call quality makes a lot of difference for me, especially in noisier environments, not so much in windy. And the fact that it has mute controls and volume is just a huge plus. That special integration with Teams is a godsend as well. And that slightly better ANC is definitely a plus. And what I also like is that there's no white noise in transparency mode. Then in the looks department, I just feel that the Jabra looks more premium, and I really dig that soft touch feel on the buds. And the IP57 rating is a huge bonus. Yes, the IPX4 is also good enough for my use case, but if you're throwing it in a bag or in your pocket and there happens to be some dust or lint, at least you know that the buds are protected. So that's my pick. What about yours, Rohan?
What he said. I wanted to pick the Sony, man, because it does so many things so well. But I just cannot ignore the fantastic job that Jabra has done. Except for the biking with wind aspect, there's no way objectively or subjectively that I could recommend the Sony WF-1000 XM5 over the Jabra. Both are great earbuds, have terrible apps, and at the current price difference, it's a no-brainer. The Jabra Elite 10, and you know what? Just going beyond this comparison as well, I think it's going to be my daily driver because of the comfort, the pocketability, the battery life, the sound, well, the whole video. You watched the video.
Jabra and Sony sent us these products for review. You can find a disclaimer in every video we've done in terms of which items were given to us and which ones we bought. Either way, that does not affect our testing or opinion. We will never accept money from a company whose products we review. So a big thank you to you guys who are our real sponsors. You've been part of the local elite.
And we've been DHRME.
Namaste.